Hey there, Mr. Reddit here. Welcome back to another episode of r/entitled parent stories. Our first story we'll be reading today. Karen keeps eating my food, so I stopped buying it. After that, my ex lied to me about being divorced, so I ruined his life. And after that, a short time does not mean you can go on a cruise. Now for every thumbs up this video gets, one Karen has to go for a walk. I wouldn't mind that. I could use the exercise. In 100-degree weather. Oh, don't do this to me. So please smash that like button and subscribe and turn on notifications for new stories from Reddit every single day. Karen keeps eating my food, so I stopped buying it. I've been doing all my shopping online, from groceries to clothes, everything, which means I usually get a lot of deliveries. I also buy a lot of stuff for my family to use, especially when groceries and basic necessities. I started buying from more small local businesses, it being the lockdown and me wanting to help them more instead of big businesses like Amazon. This has meant having to deal with incredibly vague or straight up wrong delivery information. I've worked at a small business before, so I expected these problems and I don't mind it. A few weeks ago, Mom doesn't work anymore, Sis is on term break, and I'm working from home having a meeting. A delivery comes and no one answers the door. I have my headphones on so I can't hear the bell. The delivery man calls me and tells me that he's been ringing the door and no one is answering even though he can hear the TV. I apologize and run out to collect the parcel. See my mom in front of the telly with so much indifference. This makes me mildly annoyed and I asked her nicely to help open the door next time. Immediately she screams at me for assuming she has nothing to do, which sets off this shouting match between her and I. My sister comes out of her room, takes my mother's side and shouts at me for being rude, just for expecting my mother to answer the door. At this point, I'm livid, and I ask if it's too much to expect my own family to help with these things, especially when I'm working. They both go on about how it's my personal responsibility to collect my own deliveries, and that I should not take for granted that they'll help just because they're at home, and that I should tell them when I have deliveries coming, to which I try to explain that the often vague delivery estimates I get, this one in particular was supposed to come 2 days later. I point out to them that most of the deliveries that come for me end up being shared by the family, like groceries, coffee, necessities, etc. And that at the start of the year, before my mom quit her job, I was working from home alone, collecting everyone's deliveries even when no one tells me about any incoming ones. I singled out one day my sister had 4 deliveries and I collected them all with no complaints. But obviously, none of it gets through to them and I give up the argument since I was outnumbered. Bring on the malicious compliance. I stopped ordering groceries for the whole family and food runs out. Both mom and sister just assume that I would order more, and when I don't, they question me about it, and I tell them that it's their own personal responsibility to get their own groceries. A couple of deliveries came from my sister when she wasn't home, and I didn't bother receiving it because the personal responsibility was hers to collect. Plus, she didn't tell anyone about them. Turns out, one of those deliveries was a laptop, and because no one answered the door, it was left outside and got stolen. My sister got, rightfully, angry at me and my mother, but I used their BS personal responsibility excuse back on her. Now, no one is talking to each other, but I don't care. I feel like I've willingly and readily helped them, but when I ask for help in return, it's way too much for them to do so. This might be petty, but oh well, it's the card they chose to play. My ex lied to me about being divorced, so I ruined his life. When I was a naive 24-year-old, I met a charming and very smart and way older man. We'll call him Jake for this story. His sister is Dana, and I'm Gina. Now to the story. Jake was 42, recently divorced, or so he told me, and got a kid that he would see on the weekends. We meet online through a poetry website where both of us used to write. He was very aloof and stern on his comments, and not very popular on the website because I used to always come off like an arrogant jerk, but I really liked his poems regardless of his personality, and that's how it began. I commented on one, and he instantly PM'd back praising my writings and asking me if we could collaborate on a duet together. I've already done it 1,000 times with a few friends and people on that site that I respected, so I said sure. So, long story short, we met on Hotmail Messenger. This was nearly 11 years ago, kids, so no WhatsApp, although we did chat on Facebook too. This will come relevant later. Long story short, we instantly connected. He was funny, handsome, and really sweet underneath all his bravado. All his dark sense of humor was right up my alley. We spent months pulling all-nighters, just talking and writing together. No humble bragging, but I was pretty popular on the site because I won a few awards, so by association, he became popular too. People started to read Jake's poems and commented, and obviously he got a huge head about it, but I digress. Our relationship became more serious after he confessed that he was falling for me and I was smitten, so I went along with it. We talked about my recent breakup, and he assured me that he would never lie to me because of course he used that, jerk of his ex-wife cheated on him and he was devastated until he met me. I was shocked for how bad his ex was, but assured him that I was all in, and I meant that. One important detail about our turbulent romance is that he was in Argentina. He's Argentinian, and I was still living in Italy, in my hometown. So after almost 2 years of excuses for how tied up on work he was, I decided to surprise him with a visit. I bought my ticket, and it literally was like a dream. He picked me up, we kissed, he hugged me and took me to his beach house, which would have been my first red flag, but I was dumb, young, and in love, saying that it would be so much easier and fun for me doing touristy stuff on a beach port than staying in his suburbs house with no car. Because I told him on such short notice, he didn't have the time nor the means to take time off of work, which again was a blatant lie because he was one of the partners of the company. But again, I bought it and off I went on my own almost for the entire week that I was there. He only spent one night there with me, and the rest of the week just picked me up from wherever it was that I ended up wandering, and we hang out for a few hours, and then he just drops me off at the beach house. I know that most of you are thinking, come on OP, get your head out of the clouds and realize what a bunch of BS that is. And believe me, now that I'm writing this, I realized how much of an idiot I was. But it gets better. The day before I have to get back to Italy, he took me to dinner with his 6-year-old son and his sister. I was super happy to meet his family and his son, but got caught off guard when he just introduced me as his friend from Italy dropping in town for tourism. His sister was super sweet, albeit a bit awkward, and his son was adorable. We ate, talked, and off we went. He picked me up first thing in the morning and dropped me off in the airport. Now that you got the full story, I'll get to the good part. 2 days later, and still a bit jet-lagged, I got a very interesting email from his sister, Dana. Her email was short and very simple. Dear Gina, I know that you might think I was weird and maybe a bit rude when we met, but it was only because I was tricked by Jay to join the dinner with his kid. He never mentioned that you guys were dating, but after confronting Jake, he confessed and begged me not to tell anyone or his marriage will be ruined. But you're such a sweet young girl that doesn't deserve his deception. Jake is still married and never left their home. Don't just take my word for it. And Dana sent me pictures of his real Facebook profile and surprise, the perfect little family. I thanked her and shut down my computer. I was devastated. I really thought Jake was the love of my life and was seriously considering moving there. I spent all night crying and drinking wine until I got myself the worst migraine. But the heartbreak lasted about 12 hours. At 4 a.m., I got up, showered, made a pot of fresh coffee, and started planning my revenge. I was hurt, yes, but also so angry that he not only deceived me, but dragged his sister and his kid into his lie. I was on the other side of the world, and I didn't have the money to pay someone to go after him or egg his car. But as my Sicilian father would say to me, if someone slaps you, don't turn the other cheek, take off their hand. And so I did. Cue my sweet revenge. I sat down at my desk and turned on the computer and log into his Hotmail. I didn't have the password, but I knew him well enough to answer his 3 security questions on the section Forgot Password. 1, 2, 3, bum baby. I'm in, and wow. This arrogant piece of crap was not only dating me, but 2 other girls. I quickly logged onto his Facebook too, because he had everything linked, the naivete. So I quickly changed all his passwords to I'm a jerk, and discovered that his personal email was also connected to his work account. I dug through his emails for 2 hours. This idiot never erased anything, so he had more than 5,000 emails, until I found something very interesting. The girls he was also seeing and their very hot email exchanges, no pics included. So what did I do? You guessed it. I crafted a very lengthy email with pics and chat logs attached, confessing to Jake's wife, posting as him obviously, begging for forgiveness, and declaring how much of a jerk person I was. And as a proof of my willingness to change and transparency, was sending this email to the girls too. But that I did it only because I was gay and thought that being a player would help me forget how much I really loved the guys. That I was sick of pretending and hoped she could move on and maybe be friends. But not only to them. I copied his entire list of contacts, including the CEO and partners of the company he worked, his parents, and his sister, of course. This email was perfection. All the pictures and chats, myself included, he ever exchanged with any other woman. I copied myself on the list, obviously as a countermeasure, and move on to part 2 of my plan. I changed all of his Facebook and declaring that I was so relieved that people finally knew who I was. The pride flag was his new wall picture, and his profile picture was a photoshopped picture of 2 guys kissing. I created 5 different accounts on dating websites with all of his info, including his phone number, and started to chat with a bunch of guys until, out of nowhere, this guy sent me, or better yet, he sent Jake a message. Tony was his old university friend that had always secretly wanted him for years, and although I felt bad for this later, I set up a date. Part 3 of my plan. 1 week after this massive internet blowout and his family and friends angrily calling him all sorts of names and getting fired because his bosses didn't want the bad press, so Jake tried to make amends with his family and friends and makes a barbecue for his birthday. But I would have paid 1 year worth of salary just to see his face and his guests when in the middle of their celebration, Tony appeared with a bottle of champagne and a bag full of special items to celebrate privately as I asked. Apparently, there was a huge fight and everyone left Jake, flustered and angry, crying because some psycho wanted to ruin his life. I blocked him and forgot about everything until 6 months ago, when out of the blue, he sent me a message on Instagram asking me why I disappeared and didn't support him when he was at his lowest. And oh boy, the satisfaction I felt when I only replied back, "Sorry Jake, but I think everything you got was karma for all the lies and time wasted that you fed me. Good luck. Oh, and by the way, it was always me." I then blocked him and made my account private. Jake tried to call a few mutual friends to try and get them to give him my number, but they ignored him. They also got the infamous email. So yeah, I got my revenge, and it was worth every single hour. I know, I'm petty. A short time does not mean you can go on a cruise. It was about 10 years ago when I was married to my second and last wife, now ex-wife. I'm a chef and she worked retail. We weren't rich, but we were doing well for ourselves. We each owned our own cars, shared all the money equally because it didn't matter who made more than the other. We were married, so everything was equal. She wanted to take some classes, and instead of working her retail job, she would babysit for extra income, and I was all for it. If that's what made her happy, go for it. After she got settled with her classes, we put out ads for her babysitting side job. I know what she was offering for the price she was asking was much lower than daycare by a lot, but she wasn't in it for the money. She just loved kids. She took on 3 kids. One was 4, one was 8, and the other one was 5 if I remember correctly. All the kids were good, and we had a large fenced-in backyard they could play in with lots of kids' toys, and snacks were provided. Most of the parents were friendly and came in to pick up or drop off their kids. One mother would always come in and just say, "See you later," to her girl, the 5-year-old, and walk away. No kiss, no I love you, nothing. My ex took in kids from 2:30 p.m. when the younger kids would get out of their respective schools, kindergarten or preschool, not sure what it was called, then from 3 p.m. on for the older girl. Things seemed to be going well and my ex was happy. Then one Monday morning, not afternoon like the schedule said, the entitled mother drops her daughter off. My ex was in classes, so she was lucky it was my day off. I said I would watch her until my ex was done, then she will take over. She just shrugged like it was nothing and set a duffel bag just inside the door. I had never been part of this except to talk to the kids and entertain them now and then, so I didn't really know the drop-off or pickup procedures. Then, like always, the mother just turned and walked away. When my ex got out of her classes and saw the girl, she asked me where her mom or dad was. She said, "Mommy is going away for a few days. She said I'm staying here with you." Immediately, my ex started calling the girl's mother, only for it to go straight to voicemail. She had a listing for another number listed as Dad. It went to voicemail as well. So my ex watched all 3 kids like usual, and the parents of the other 2 kids came on time and left. This girl usually got picked up at 6:30 p.m., but not that day. That time came and went. Then 8:30. Then it was close to 10 p.m. The entire time, my ex was calling these numbers with the same results. Nothing but voicemail. By this time, the girl had fallen asleep and we put her in the spare room. My ex called the police to let them know what was going on, but said that we will keep her with us for now until we reach the mother. After many tries to both numbers with no better results, I went onto Facebook and found this lady's profile. I was going to look for a family member or a contact we could call. As soon as the homepage came up, my jaw hit the floor. There was a picture of them on a cruise ship as it was leaving port. I called in my ex, and she was as flabbergasted as I was. Going through her friends list, I saw her mother. I contacted her to let her know what was happening and someone has to come pick up their daughter. We didn't sign up for this. Her mother told us that she would be there as soon as she could. After close to 2 hours, the grandmother showed up to collect the girl. But she wasn't alone. She brought the girl's father. By the way the girl yelled, "Daddy!" then ran and hugged him, I knew it had been a while since they had seen each other. We invited them in for coffee, and the grandmother told us the story. From what she told us, her daughter had run off with some rich guy and didn't want to tell anyone where she was. The guy on the cruise with her was the man she was cheating with and not her husband. The father had called the police from our place and had them come there for proof of abandonment. I showed the officer the Facebook photo dated just the night before. He got the father and grandmother to go with him to the police station to fill out the paperwork, but took our statements at our house. We signed them and they were gone. We never heard from the mother for the next 3 weeks and thought it was odd she wouldn't call to go nuclear on us. Then a couple of days later, we had an excited banging on the door. When I opened it, I saw the father beaming with joy, holding his daughter's hand. I invited them in and he filled us in on all the juicy details. She made big money and he was a stay-at-home dad. And the last year, she had been distancing herself from him. When he confronted her, she said he was delusional. Later on, he drove to the store to pick up some odds and ends, but when he got home, she and his daughter were gone. All there was a note saying goodbye and that he would never see either of them again, and the police seemed useless. She started an affair while they were still together. Around the same time, she started acting differently, but he didn't clue in. After she ran off, he took the note to her mother, who did everything she could to help, but her daughter was ignoring her too. She even hired someone to find her. It was just by chance we found them, and they couldn't believe their luck. The father said the mother had some major and minor charges. The father said he now has 100% custody of their daughter. The mother got in the area of 16 years in total. She was also ordered by the court to have zero contact indefinitely or until she finishes her jail time and extensive therapy. The father was also awarded the house and all assets because he didn't have any income or way to support his daughter. The company the mother worked for also cashed out all stocks or whatever they were and just gave the money to them as well. Even though they were not responsible for doing that, just helping out. The other man she was on the cruise with owned a smallish company with his wife. When this all came out, she started proceedings for a divorce, and since the company was started by her family and he didn't buy into it, it all went to her. She was also taking him to court for more things too. In the end, he had nothing and she had it all. He wasn't charged with any of the wrongdoings because he wasn't there to drop the girl off. My ex was sad to be losing such a sweet girl, but they stayed in contact. As far as I know, they are still in contact. The dad got a job with the kitchen I work in as a server. I didn't get him the job, he did that all by himself. I only put in a good word with my boss. I'm long gone from that place, but he is now a co-owner and still goes in every day and serves tables. All tips he normally would make, he gives to the bussers and hosts and hostesses because they are part-time high school kids who wouldn't get tips. I hope her cruise was worth it. The man we called Subsection 6. This happened a long time ago, somewhere around 2012 to 2013. Had a good friend who I smoked cigars with, and he has a friend named Jim. I didn't see Jim very often because we lived in different cities, but every time I visited, we would smoke cigars in the park. Well, near the park. Jim was probably about the smartest guy that I've ever met, and if I met Einstein, it might be eeny, meeny, miny, more. Well, almost. We called him Subsection 6 because he was always finding loopholes for absolutely everything. He's the kind of guy that would read all the tax laws and interpretation bulletins and mold his life to that. He was one of the first people that was working from home. He had his printer in a different room than where he had his office so that he could claim more square footage as the home office. He was that kind of guy, and he wasn't an accountant or anything. He was an IT guy. He just read lots. One day, the three of us went down to the beach to smoke cigars. In parks, you're not allowed to smoke, but we grabbed our chairs and went anyways. The tide was low, so we went down just past the rocks where the sand started and smoked away. That's when I heard this story. So remember Einstein told a story about if he had 1 hour to solve a problem to save his life, he would think of the proper question for 58 minutes? Well, Jim's one of those kinds of guys that asks questions that we don't think about. He looked around the park because he was busted one time, and he asked himself this question. I can see the property line where the road is. I can see the property line where there's a house next door, and he can see the property line where there was a hotel next. But where is the property line when you're looking out at the ocean? He did his homework, and he found out that while the city owned the foreshore, it was DFO that owns the ocean from the high tide line down. That is Crown land, and they don't have a prohibition for smoking on the ocean. This is where we had our chairs the day he told me the story. So he lives in a retirement city with lots of old ladies who have their morning walks, and the same time he has his morning cigar. That's how he got busted in the first place, but he was ready after he did his research. He used that printer that was in the other room, and he printed out the laws. He also made a phone call to one of the cigar buddies who was a lawyer who knew a lawyer that did property stuff. I'm not talking about real estate transactions when you buy a house. I'm talking about property rights, air rights, things like that. A lot higher up in the food chain. Top floor corner office kind of guy. So depending on the cigar, you're looking at 45 minutes to smoke a Robusto to an hour and a half for a Churchill or anything bigger than that. Soon thereafter, the Karens came by, complaining about him smoking in the park even though he was in the ocean. This was even years before anyone was called Karen. So the Karens started bugging him and threatened to call the police or bylaw, and he told them to go ahead. He just started his cigar, so he had plenty of time. He sent a message to his lawyer friend of a friend to give him a heads up he might be calling later. No problem. Well, the Karens didn't just call bylaw, they called the police. So Jim continued smoking a cigar while he handed over the printout regarding foreshore ownership. It's not the fault of the police because they're used to speeding and stuff like that, but they didn't know this law. Bylaw comes by and pretty much the same, so he gets on his phone, shows them the lawyer's website, and makes the call. Meanwhile, the cops and bylaw are phoning their supervisors about this as well. Of course, the Karens are not happy, so they start complaining about the secondhand smoke, but they don't have any legal basis. Jim talks to the property rights lawyer on speakerphone, and he says for the police and bylaw supervisors to give him a shout, and he will enlighten them about where the park property begins and ends. And of course, the best part of the story is that we were smoking a 10-year-old Punch Churchill when he told me this story. So the epilogue is that whenever he's smoking at low tide and bylaw comes by, not just for him, but for dogs and drinking and other stuff like that, they always shake their head and wave. They told him they've had complaints about him smoking in the park, and they now ask where is the guy, in the park or down in the sand? Because the sand isn't the park, it's the ocean. As far as the printer and taxes go, I don't know the whole story. What I do know is that he was subsection 6, and not only did he discover the law that said below high tide was not the park, but he also read a lot of the interpretation bulletins from the tax authority. He wouldn't commit any tax fraud, he would use the rules to the full extent. Unfortunately, I can't confirm what happened. I do know at this point he hasn't been audited. I'm a semi-newbie. Sometimes in your life, you meet someone and you just go, wow. Jim was that guy. There's a lot of things he didn't have in his life, like a wife and kids, but he lived his life like a how-to textbook. Everything was well thought out and structured. He was gregarious, kind, and giving. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not the candy striper you're looking for. Edit. A candy striper is a hospital volunteer. My dad was recently in the hospital for about 8 weeks for a brain infection. He's back home now and doing very well. I don't live nearby, but I came to visit almost every day. The hospital and where my dad lives is in a town in Southern California where it's been averaging 110 degrees every day and rarely gets below 90 degrees, even during the wee hours of the morning. The way the hospital is set up, there's a roundabout in front of the main entrance with a valet service, and there's a parking garage for patients and visitors just across the road from the main entrance. I'm terrible with distances, but I'd say it's maybe 30 meters from the garage to the hospital entrance. One day I'm visiting, and as I'm driving into the garage, I notice an older gentleman leaning against a pillar as though he's waiting for someone before crossing the rows of parked cars. I park, and then as I'm exiting the garage, I see the same old man outside, now leaning on a half wall with his hands on his knees. I ask him if he needs any help, and he tells me he's visiting his brother, but it's so hot and he doesn't think he can make it across the street to the entrance. I told him I'd be right back with a wheelchair and help. I ran inside the hospital to the main entrance and asked the security guards at the front desk where visitors sign in if they had any volunteers and a wheelchair who can help this guy. They basically said no, and it will be a while before they can find someone. Obviously, I can't let this guy just sit in 100-degree-plus heat, so I look around the lobby, and lo and behold, there's a wheelchair available. So I grab it and head back to the old man. I get him settled in the chair, and we head into the hospital. We get our visitor's badges, and they tell me where to go to see his brother, but it's literally on the other side of the hospital. This poor guy, who I found out is pushing 90, barely made it 10 feet in the parking garage before needing a break. So I asked security, "Okay, I'm not heading that way, so can someone else push him there?" Again, no, they can't leave the front desk, and there are no volunteers on staff right now. I ask, "What about the hospital transport team?" "Nope, that's just for patients." I'm like, wow, okay, this is some BS. But I have a little time, so I'll just get him to his brother's room, and then the nurses will probably be way more capable of finding someone to help this man back to the parking garage. At this point, I haven't been outside the ICU and didn't know the hospital very well, so they give me a map and off we go. I kid you not, it took us 5 minutes to walk there. This poor dude never would have made it on his own. We ended up having a very lovely chat about PA. He was wearing a pirate's hat, as I mentioned. I went to college in Lancaster. And when we got to his brother's room, a very nice nurse thanked me and took over. I felt super good about myself, not gonna lie. It always feels nice to do a good deed. About a week later, I'm coming out of the garage, and now there's a different old man, this time with an oxygen tank, sitting in the same spot as the first old guy. Here we go again, I thought. Same deal. This guy is much younger, 60s, but has heart and breathing issues and just can't make it across the way in this heat. This time, I know where the extra wheelchairs are kept, so I go to the lobby, grab one, pick this dude back up, and we head inside to check in. He kept asking me questions about being a candy striper, and I told him I didn't work for the hospital, but I didn't mind helping him. Mind you, I'm wearing like workout shorts and a tank top, so I definitely don't look like a candy striper or someone that works in the hospital. He then complained about my wheelchair choice because it didn't have footrests, but it was the only one left, so oh well. Turns out he is at the wrong building and needs to go basically around the block to find a clinic on campus. Now, luckily, he was there to check in as a patient, so the transport team could come help this time because this man was much more abrasive. Also, could have gone without the multiple, "You're way prettier than any other candy stripers I've seen" comments, but whatever. I told him I was going to leave him now, and good luck, because this time I was in a rush to meet with my dad's doctors. As I'm slowly backing away, he just kept blabbering about how young people have gone to crap because no one would help him until I came along, how I'm such a good candy striper and the younger generation is doomed, blah blah blah. Anyway, I eventually just loudly interrupted and said something like, "Okay sir, the transport team will be here shortly and you can wait here with security. Good luck," and walked away. So far, I haven't come across anyone else who needs my wheelchair valet services, but I think it's safe to say it's time for the hospitals to hire some actual volunteers. Am I the jerk for no longer making toys and furniture for my former sister-in-law? My brother passed before his firstborn child was born. Because of this, I've had an above-average involvement in my nephew's life. One thing I've always done is build him toys and furniture. It was a way of providing without the awkwardness of handing over cash. Also, between my late brother's cash and life insurance via work, a trust was set up for my nephew for £500,000. He wasn't actually married to my sister-in-law. Now, via the lab at work, I've made him a lot of wooden or 3D printed toys, but also some simple handmade electronic toys. My sister-in-law was always grateful for these, and my nephew, by all accounts, loves his custom toys. Fast forward 3 years, and my former sister-in-law has gotten married. I was attending my nephew's 3rd birthday, and I turned up the night before to assemble his present. It was a small climbing frame and swing set I had watched better carpenters than me in the lab make. The new husband was a little standoffish, but come the day of the party, he was telling anyone who listened that I didn't pay or make the present. I had lackeys at work do it for free. This culminated in him calling all my presents an embarrassment, and given my fancy job, I could afford to splash some cash. I confronted him and my former sister-in-law, and she basically confirmed that whilst presents were appreciated, she honestly expected more direct support from me after my brother's passing. My mother stepped in and reminded her that my brother paid for this house and they regularly take cash out of the trust, approximately £10,000 a year. We walked out without hearing any worthwhile response, but I continue to see my nephew without incident. 6 to 7 months go by, and I'm visiting, only to be told my former sister-in-law was pregnant with twins, and she was wondering if I could make some duplicates of items I had made for my nephew as they needed 2 sets. I scoffed, said she had a lot of nerve asking me to make stuff after she was so ungrateful, and I owe her unborn kids very little. She got upset and explained her prior statements about my handmade gifts and said she felt that they were kinda little things someone did as a favor, not what a family provides. That's why she's asking me now as a friend to do her a favor and manufacture duplicates. I said no again, and her husband shouted through that it didn't really matter. They would just use the trust to provide for kids like it's supposed to. I retorted that it was for my nephew, and good luck accessing it for that because the trust requires my signature to pay out. I wasn't even home before he was calling me to apologize, clearly unaware I held the reins to my late brother's money. The apology was insincere, and I asked to speak to my former sister-in-law, where I confirmed again I wouldn't be manufacturing her anything. I'll still be an uncle to my nephew and be impartial when it comes to her accessing my nephew's trust, but her husband has burned a lot of my goodwill with this. Am I the jerk for not doing her a favor after all that?
Click this button to join as a member today and we'll give you a shout out in our next video.
Or come watch this video next. You won't believe what happened in that one.